Hey, right, as promised, the Pillion report on the Honda GB350s today. But before I get my teeth into that, I just want to make one correction on the GB350 video that I made last Wednesday, the walk around. I misquoted the price. I think I was having a bit of a blonde moment. I said that the new price for this bike as of the 1st of April 2025 was £4,999. I don't know what happened there, because of course it is £3,999. And there's also something else that we need to tackle, because I'm getting so many comments from people who don't understand why modern bikes are so much heavier than, you know, the equivalent bikes from back in the sort of 1980s and 1970s, and why these bikes are so limited on power. You know, I mean, back in 1980, a 250 could manage 80, 90 miles an hour. Now we have these new 350s that are struggling to get much past 70 miles an hour. Well, you can thank the European Union for that, Euro emissions. Since 1999, when the Euro emissions 1 came into force for motorcycles across Europe and the UK and other countries, because a lot of other countries adhere to the European emission standards, carburetors have been consigned to the history books because they're not efficient enough to keep emissions low, so we had to have fuel injection, which is heavier than a carburetor. Then we had to have ECUs fitted to control the fuel injection and emissions, which adds more weight. And as the Euro emission standards became stricter, more equipment has had to be added to keep the engines in check. The latest, of course, being, was it back in 2016, when they had to start putting catalytic converters in bikes. This has resulted in bikes becoming very bloated. It's also resulted in them becoming taller, to be able to sort of stuff all that equipment into what is quite a small machine, and that's resulted in seats getting thinner, so they're less comfortable. And then we've got the mandate of bikes having to have ABS, which has added even more weight. I mean, a catalytic converter alone can weigh up to 6 kilograms, so yeah, that's why bikes are so heavy compared to how they used to be. It's not the manufacturers, it's the manufacturers having to adhere to what the European Union's told them they've got to build if they want to sell them in Europe and the UK and a lot of other countries that also adhere to the Euro emissions standards. So that's the weight issue explained. Now, the other thing is, on the 1st of January this year, 2025, the new Euro 5 Plus or Euro 5B regulations came into force. And I did make a video on this a year ago explaining what was going to happen. Now, I don't know if any other YouTube channels have covered it. They're probably not even aware of it themselves. But I know that a lot of the big motorcycle publications did cover it in articles at the time. The new Euro 5 Plus regulations state that motorcycles have to have real-time emissions status monitoring devices fitted, which makes them a lot more expensive, and we've already seen quite a lot of large motorcycle models dropped by the manufacturers in the European market because it quite simply is impossible to make them fit with the new regulations. The world is changing. You are going to see your choice of large, powerful, fast motorcycles diminish over the next few years. Now, as it stands at the moment, I think manufacturers or dealerships have got up to 2 years to get rid of pre-2025 stock that doesn't fit this new emissions regime. Initially, they were only given a year to get rid of that stock, so you know they had to have sold it by the end of 2025. But I think it has, in some cases, been extended because obviously there were a lot of stocks left over last year because, you know, with the cost of living crisis, etc., motorcycle sales were poor. So I think it's been extended by another year, but don't quote me on that. I might be wrong. Now, the reason that we're seeing the sort of 350 class expanding in Europe all of a sudden is that bikes that are not capable of travelling at 80 miles an hour or faster are exempt from the Euro 5 Plus regulations. Hence the introduction of the Honda GB350s about the same time that those regulations came into force. This is the future of motorcycling in Europe and the UK. Because as time goes on, those emission standards are only going to get tighter, they're not going to get looser. So these bikes are of a very soft tune. They're essentially electronically limited to a top speed somewhere in the early 70 mph range. Obviously, if you set up a bike to do 80 miles an hour on the flat with no headwind, the possibility is that with a backwind or going downhill or both, it would exceed the 80 mile an hour limit, and those bikes would then come within the remit of the Euro 5 Plus. So the manufacturers have to sort of put a safety margin in on the top speed. And I think what we're going to see in the near future is, the 350 class is going to become one of the most hotly contested sales segment in the motorcycle market. I think the criteria for the future is going to be price, real life flexibility, fuel economy and quality. And Honda's GB350s is a prime example of the direction that we're going in. Now, please accept my apologies for bunging up the first 6.5 minutes on this video on this subject, but we need to get that out there. You need to understand what these bikes are about. Over the last few years, the 350 segment has become my favourite class of motorcycle, and Honda's entry into this segment really has blown the competition away. They've got the best price to quality ratio on the market. Real world performance is just a little bit above what the competition's doing, and by using modern quality materials, they've managed to get the weight right down compared to everyone else. But the bike has to be flexible in all walks of life. You'll get a lot more flexibility and use out of a motorcycle if it can competently carry a pillion. Many bikes are designed for solo riding, and pillion use is a bit of an afterthought, and those bikes, although they do have pillion carrying abilities, tend to be a bit of a compromise. Okay for occasional use, but you wouldn't want to do it all the time. Then there are other bikes that are designed and built from the ground up to take a pillion, and the Honda GB350s is one of those bikes. Now, as you know, my partner Paula, she's not really a motorcyclist, she's not into bikes, but providing the bike's right, I can persuade her to ride pillion with me, which means I get a lot more use out of the bike because we can do things together rather than me just going out on my own and having to watch the clock to get home because we have to do other things. Now, I managed to talk Paula into coming out with me on the GB350 by promising to buy a breakfast at McDonald's, and that's where the day started. This was on Friday morning because Paula works at a school, so of course it's Easter holidays at the moment. The weather was the best we've had so far this year. There was no wind except on the Humber Bridge. I'll go into that in a moment. It was warm and sunny, perfect riding conditions. Now, we tested the bike out in all sorts of traffic situations. We were riding all together for about 4 hours. So we've got stop-start traffic in built-up areas. We've got A and B roads at between 40 and 60 miles an hour. I tested it out on the Humber Bridge because it's always very windy on the Humber Bridge, and I wanted to know how the bike reacts with side winds 2 up. And we finished off with a motorway test to see whether the bike was capable with a pillion at motorway speeds. Now, one thing that did immediately become very clear to me that I wasn't expecting is that the engine and that tall fifth gear is actually far more flexible than I expected it to be. At 40 mile an hour in fifth gear going over bridges and overpasses, I soon realised that this engine has more than enough torque to cope with inclines without sapping power from the engine. Little, if any, throttle adjustments required to maintain 40 miles an hour going over these sort of obstacles. This is with a Pillion on board. Prior to us setting off, I'd set the suspension up on preload setting number 4. There's a total of 5 adjustments. Now, on reflection, I could probably have got away with 3, but we left it on 4 all day. Honda have got the damping on those rear shocks set up absolutely perfectly, which is a good job because there's no damping adjustment on this bike. Now, both compression and rebound dampening work exactly as you would hope they would work on any bike, to be quite honest. But very often we are let down with these sort of qualities on stock shock absorbers. Now, I did get told off several times for purposely aiming for potholes. In stop-start traffic and sort of free-moving but slow urban traffic, the GB350 provides both the rider and the passenger with a firm but comfortable ride. The compression damping works really well to soak up even the harshest bumps, controlling spring compression really well. But then the rebound damping reacts fast enough to return the spring back to its required length. What you have is a situation where you don't lose spring length over harsh road conditions, eventually, running out of shock absorber and bottoming out. Rapid compression and recovery is excellent. Now, as you know, the front forks are not adjustable, but the spring rate and the damping do complement the rear suspension quite well. It felt really well balanced, in that stop-start traffic where you're braking, you're accelerating, you're braking again, then you're accelerating. It often introduces a sort of seesaw movement which can get quite tiring. And it's usually sort of comes into play, especially when you've got a Pillion on board with that extra weight. The Honda behaved impeccably. It was rock solid. It stayed level throughout, stop-start traffic conditions. I was really impressed with it. One thing that I did notice in slow-moving traffic conditions is just how well balanced the Honda is. There are times when it's easy to forget that you've got a Pillion on board. The slightest movement from the Pillion sometimes can sort of make the bike jerk from side to side. There was none of that with the Honda. So even when you're standing still for long periods of time in traffic or at traffic lights, it's not tiring or in any way hard on the rider. The bike's really easy to hold up. Bearing in mind that at the start of this journey we had a full 15-litre fuel tank as well. This equates to a really easy to use, civilised and agile motorcycle in traffic conditions. Luckily we were able to make use of the bus lanes on the GB350 because we're allowed to use the bus lanes here in Hull. So we weren't at the mercy of traffic jams for very long. Now, wind. Side winds can be an issue, especially when you're carrying a Pillion and you've effectively got 2 people sitting on the bike that act like one big sail. So crosswinds can be an issue. Like I said, last Friday wasn't a particularly windy day, but you can always guarantee that the Humber Bridge will provide you with quite a healthy side wind. We experienced 20 to 30 mile an hour gusts hitting us at about 10 o'clock from the rider's position. I could feel the wind sort of pushing and poking at me, but it didn't cause the bike to deviate from the course that I'd set for it. And there was no tendency for it to sort of try to push the bike over, that situation where you have to lean into the wind to stay on your bike. I have to say, again, I was surprised at how well the Honda coped with these wind conditions. It's a relatively light motorcycle with a low centre of gravity. I didn't think it would cope as well as it did. Or maybe it was the extra weight. Not me, obviously. I only weigh 7 stone. It's Paula that's the problem. As he explained, the Honda behaves impeccably in slow-moving traffic and traffic jams, but the faster you go, actually the better it gets. Roll on from 40 miles an hour in 5th gear is relaxed, but the engine doesn't complain, even with a Pillion on board, and it will happily overtake other vehicles providing, you know, you plan the situation properly. I found there was rarely any need to change down. We actually found that riding on A and B roads is exquisite on this little bike. The suspension predictably works even better at higher speeds, and handling becomes witchcraft. Now, with that big 19-inch front wheel, I expected the Honda to be a little bit ponderous in the handling department, but they've done some sort of voodoo with the rake of the front forks that means it's neither fast or slow, it's neutral, and it goes exactly where you want it to go. It's safe and it's secure and it's confidence inspiring. I said when I was riding this bike solo that you know, the bike handles really well, but I honestly believe it handles slightly better with a pillion on board. It's really stable and it's just such a pleasure to ride, especially when the weather's nice. Now, seating position and the seat itself is really comfortable. There's loads of room for both pillion and rider. In fact, in real terms, there's more seat spacing than you actually need, which is good. It gives you, you know, room to move about. There is a slight issue, however, for the pillion, which I'll cover off in a few minutes. As I said in my initial review, the seat does feel quite firm when you first get on it, and you sort of get the idea in your head that long distances this is not going to be comfortable, but it's the opposite. I actually found I can stay in this standard seat on the Honda far longer than I can on most seats. It sort of reminds me of the Royal Enfield touring seats, except in this case it comes with the bike as standard. I have to say, throughout the entire day I never felt as though, you know, the bike was unable to keep up with the prevailing traffic conditions. The 350 engine provides what I would describe as real-world performance, perfectly adequate for whatever you need to do. Now, mid-afternoon we stopped off at Beverley for a bit of a leg stretch and a walk around. I found the helmet lock provided with the bike, which I'd forgotten to mention in the last review, sorry about that. But it was the first time that we had the opportunity really to discuss Paula's pillion experience on this bike, which on the whole was a very positive one. Now, she found the suspension and the seat to be very comfortable. The other thing that she liked was that with the design of the seat, she was able to see over my shoulder and she could see what was coming up on the journey. She was also able to keep an eye on the clock, so she knew how fast I was going. On the whole, she loved it, and she reckoned that she could travel long distances on this bike without any issues. But there is one issue, and that is the lack of a passenger grab rail. Now, Honda have supplied a passenger strap, a pillion strap, but as I pointed out in the last video, it is quite far back on the seat, a little bit too far back to be of any real use. Paula found that she had to shuffle right to the very back of the seat, further than she really needed to, in order to be able to access it. And that meant that she was really wasting a lot of the seating space that's available to the pillion, and it became a little bit uncomfortable over long distance. Now, there are some sort of grab handles at either side and below the pillion seat that I thought she would be able to use, but she found she couldn't reach them. You know, if she grabbed hold of one, her arm wasn't long enough for her to be able to grab hold of the other one, which would make the rider unstable, so that didn't work out. This really needs a passenger grab rail. Now, I know that they come with them as standard in other territories. For some reason, here in the UK, they've decided not to include one, which I think is a bit of a misstep. It's probably because, you know, all the whingers will complain that it spoils the lines of the bike. But I think it's a safety item that really must be on all motorcycles that are capable of carrying a pillion. Now, there are some available online. I've had a quick look around. Strangely, even though Honda supply one, you know, on the bikes in some territories, there isn't one in the accessory list for here in the UK, which I found a bit odd. but I don't consider it to be a deal breaker. You will be able to source one from somewhere. It's just one of those little things, you know, no bike is perfect, and in this case the only imperfection with the Honda GB350s, as far as I'm concerned, is that it doesn't have a passenger grab rail. It's something that should be easily sorted. Now, on our way home, I did discuss with Paula that I needed to ascertain whether or not the GB350 is capable of travelling at motorway speeds, that's 70 miles an hour here in the UK, with a pillion on board. Now, I was pretty sure that I knew what the answer would be, but people, you know, they're going to want to see it for themselves. Now, I didn't take her on an actual motorway because of her issue that she was having with this, you know, pillion seat grab rail. So on the way home, we just took a short deviation onto a section of dual carriageway, which I think all in all is about 2 miles long, with a roundabout in the middle. Now, at this time on this section of road there was no wind, but I should mention it is a very slight gradient. You are climbing all the time. I would say the gradient is almost negligible, but obviously it is going to have some impact on a little bike like this. Now, this shouldn't be considered a proper motorway test. I have already filmed that. It's in the can, ready for upload on Friday, along with the hill test. So it's just for reference purposes, really, to demonstrate whether or not this can, you know, this bike can reach motorway speeds with a pillion on board. Right, here we go. So that was 70 miles an hour with relative ease, I think. I don't think there was much left after that. I took it up to 70 in 4th gear and then shifted into 5th. It held it just fine, just to prove it wasn't a fluke. Here we go again. I held on to 4th gear just a little bit longer that time, got an indicated 75 miles per hour, not too shabby. Obviously, steep gradients and headwinds are going to compromise that top end performance, but all in all, I think for long distance travelling, 2 up, yeah, this little Honda is perfectly capable. Now, I'll go into more detail about hill climbing and motorway travel in the next video on Friday. So once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. It does help me out. Also, there are other ways to help via my Patreon page or via PayPal donations or by use of the super thanks button down below. Not essential, but it is appreciated. I am of course going to be back on Friday, so until then please ride safely and I'll see you soon.